Can I say that you are never too far away, you're never too far down, you're never too deep down in sin where the Lord cannot reach you. And regardless as to what has happened in your life, it doesn't mean that God doesn't care for you. I want to tell you tonight, no matter what has happened in your life, God can turn your life around. God can make something out of nothing. Whenever God came and the Spirit of God hovered over this world, the earth was without form and void. And God makes beauty out of ashes. And God can take a life that's wrecked with sin and misery and fear and guilt and anger and shame and turn it into something that's useful and usable. And if I said nothing more or nothing else, that's my testimony. That's my testimony. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. I think it's a good idea to have an opportunity to share a word of testimony right at the beginning of this mission. It lets you folk know who I am and where I come from. Somebody said, "Are you one of the Gillanderses from Belfast?" I didn't know there was any Gillanders in Belfast. I thought I was the only Gillanders in Belfast. And it seems to me that there's a few Gillanderses scattered around here and there. Well, I was brought up in Monaghan, just over the border, not just down Mexico way, but just across in the south there a wee bit. I was born at a very young age. I don't remember the day I was born, but I do remember the day I was born again. I was born into a family of 11 children, and I'm the best looking of them all. 6 girls and 5 boys. My wife says that all the time. She says I'm gorgeous. Now, the last time I saw her, she had 2 pairs of glasses. That might have something to do with it. We were born in a little 32-acre farm just across the border there in Monaghan. But sometimes when you're looking and you're listening to the preacher, you don't really know what's going on or what is going on in that person's life. You think that perhaps, well, they've always been brought up with it. I mean, it's all right for them. They've never had the fears or the difficulties, or they haven't had the background or the upbringing that I've had. Well, I want to tell you a number of things about our early growing up years. I see my cousin Kenneth Russell's here, so he'll be able to keep you straight. And if you want to find out anything, you can ask him at the end of the meeting. But we weren't a very religious crowd. We went to Ballyalbany Presbyterian Church, but we hadn't very much interest in what the minister had to say. In fact, now and again he used to warn us that he'd be visiting Fadoo. That was the townland that we used to live in. And he would stand up on a Sunday, and I shall be visiting Fadoo on Tuesday. He used to chew marbles for a pastime. And so that meant, so we were going to have the minister on Tuesday, but we were well ready for his reverence whenever he came to our house. He used to drive a nice, bright, lime green Hillman Hunter. Boy, that's not easily said. You know that? I'll try that again. He used to drive a bright, lime green Hillman Hunter. Does anybody remember the Hillman Hunters? You're on the old age pension, you boy, you. Anyway, we called our house Sallymount. And we lived almost at the top of the hill. You just went up to the high garden, we called it, and you could see the crossroads. And we would be on lookout post for his reverence coming. When he was at the crossroads, it meant that he had another 5 to 7 minutes before he got to our house. Now, my brother Ian, he used to like to play tricks, and we didn't want the minister near us. So he used to paint me, especially when the minister was due, he would paint me little red spots. I remember this as well. And so we saw his reverence coming. I was already in my red spots. He put me in the wheelbarrow and wheeled me to the foot of the lane. When his reverence came to the foot of the lane, he looked at me, red spots. "What's wrong with Trevor?" "Chicken pox." And he turned his car and went back home where he belonged. Now and again, I think he became aware of now, I'm after mentioning Ian's name. Ian lives in Armagh. I have license to tell you that because I said, "Ian, is it all right if I tell the story?" He says, "You tell away. It'll cost you a tenner every time you tell it." But now and again, his reverence wouldn't warn us that he was coming. And the next thing you'd see this nice, light, bright, lime green Hillman Hunter coming across our lane. Now, our lane wasn't a nice tarmac lane. No, there's all sorts of potholes and humps and hollows, so we had to come nice and slowly. That was our last line of defence. My mother used to run around the house. This is true. You think I would tell you lies in the pulpit? My mother used to race up and around the house and get the house kind of tidied and get the sideboard. She used to call it the good room. Nobody was allowed in the good room. And she used to call it, she used to dust off the sideboard and get the Bible out and get it on the sideboard. And to make it look as if we were reading the Bible all the time. He never once challenged us about our need of salvation. Never once told us we need to be saved. Never once asked us had we ever been born again. But he was a nice man. A lot of people are nice men. But I'll tell you, you'll only be faithful whenever you tell a soul of their need of Christ. Well, that's the way we lived, and that's how we were. We weren't very gospel greedy. We weren't, in any sense of the word, hungry for God. Well, I went through life reckless. Bought my first motorbike when I was 15 years of age. And I bought it in HP. Does anybody know what HP is? And it's not sauce. Hire purchase, it means it'll never be yours. That's what it means. Because the time when you have it paid for it's done, you have to buy another one. Not true. Well, I bought my first motorbike. We were as mad as March hares. Took my first pint of Smithwick's when I was about 15 years of age, over at Long Nancy's pub, just over there between Middletown and Armagh. And behind Long Nancy's pub there was a bit of a hill. At the foot of the hill there was a humpback bridge, and the other side of the humpback bridge was a sharp corner. Whenever we got a big bit of Dutch courage, we used to tear down that hill about as fast as we could on the motorbike, hit the humpback bridge, and we were airborne without a pilot's license. Now you had to, this was our own, you see you've got Xboxes and Nintendos and all sorts of things. All we had was Dutch courage and a motorbike. And so that was our excitement. And you had to land the motorbike on our side. Kenneth, you remember this? You had to land the motorbike on our side, because if you did land on your side, you went over the precipice or through the hedge, and who knows, maybe into eternity. You know, whenever I look back over that, I say, God had his hand upon me. What if I had missed the corner? What if I had gone through the hedge? I remember one time, me and another friend, Kenneth Hamilton. And I remember one day we were going to join Clonturbert Pipe Band, an orange pipe band. And we were going around the corner. There's only one speed my motorbike knew, flat out. We broke the speed limit once, going up past it. Anyway, we're going around the road one day, going to join the orange band, and we're going around this corner, flat out as usual, but cows had been on the road before us, and they'd left foreign objects all over the place. Anyway, we'll come to this corner, and I tell you what, there's not much traction when cows have been on the road. And the last thing I seen was my friend Kenneth Hamilton, not Kenneth Russell, Kenneth Hamilton. And the last thing I see was him going through the hedge, head first. I don't know if we ever found him or not. We were reckless, mad as hatters. You know, I often think of that little verse. He shall send his angels to keep guard over you, to them who shall be heirs of salvation. I thank God that he had his hand on me. Because in all of those accidents, and the many times, I can remember one day I was going so fast on the motorbike, I was coming home from the bakery, I was going so fast, and I was coming up towards a bridge, and I saw this lorry stopping in the middle of the road, but I was going so fast, I knew I was not going to get stopped. And so presence of mind took over, and I put the motorbike down on her side, and I slid away onto the lorry. And had I had my head above the tail of the lorry, I would have been decapitated. I would have been a headless preacher. And I'm sure you've met one or two of them before. You know, God has been faithful, and he's been gracious to me. And as I look back over the antics, and I've only told you a little bit just to give you a picture of who and what I was and where I come from, and now you understand the preacher and his antics. See, I wasn't spoon-fed the gospel. I wasn't brought up to learn Sunday school. Yeah, we were sent to church, well, as often as Bob Graham would take us. He wouldn't take us every Sunday because our cows used to eat his grass. And he never liked that. So we weren't brought up in a Christian atmosphere. Not by any stretch of the imagination.
We were born into a 3-bedroom farming house. There was mother and father and 11 children, all living in a 3-bedroom house. The first to bed got a bed, and the last up got no breakfast and had to walk to school. That was us. And oftentimes we went half dressed because somebody else had got their clothes on them. That was us. But in many ways, I suppose, we look back with some happy memories, some difficult memories. But one thing we didn't have was any thought of who God really was. We were not brought up to know God, and we had no interest in the things of God. We would describe us being hillbillies. We have been the kind of people that would come out from the cracks and crevices and scare the living daylights out of you. I had absolutely no desire for school or education, and oftentimes you'd find me hiding somewhere to try and not go to school. Every time I think of that, folks, I humble myself. I almost break down and weep, and I think how loving, how merciful, how long-suffering, and how patient God was with me. Well, when I was about 19 years of age, I met the best-looking woman in Ireland. And you know who that is, don't you? You thought it was you, Mrs., didn't you? No, it was the wife, Esther. Within 6 months we were married, and we were living in a little apartment, a little flat in Glasgow Street in Monaghan. And then after a number of years, we went the way of all the world, and we tried by various means and bought ourselves a house. And that was about 3 or 4 years after we were married. Our second son was now on the road. And like all parents, you're planning, you're looking towards, and you have great expectation and anticipation of a healthy newborn babe gracing your home. Because every little life's a miracle of God's grace. Isn't that true? And of course, Esther had these kind of suspicions, but she never voiced them very much, other than her and I would have an odd little private conversation. I can remember the day that Raymond was born. I had been chased home from the hospital by the nurses because they didn't allow the husbands to stay in those days. They would have a hard job putting me home today. Whenever I was on the way down towards the hospital to phone again to see, because this was a very long and laboured and drawn out labour, my brother Larry was coming running up the lane or up the road to say that the hospital had phoned. We didn't have a phone, but he had a phone. The hospital had phoned his house to say that I needed to get to the hospital fast. There were complications. When I got to the hospital, Esther was in floods of tears. She was very distraught, and the hospital staff looked at each other quite puzzled, because the moment that Raymond was born, Esther turned to the midwife. Her name was Nan, and she said to Nan, "He's Down syndrome, isn't he? Take him away." That's how she reacted. They can't to this day understand how Esther knew he was Down syndrome, because they didn't know. And they had to spend 3 days in tests before they found out of his condition. Esther will tell you, and the book says, that she had a premonition all the way during that pregnancy. She will tell you today that God let her know, informed her, made her understand that he was Down syndrome. But then one day when he was still in the incubator in the hospital, he turned blue and he started coughing up blood. He was rushed up to Drogheda, and we were in the car right behind him all the way up to Drogheda. And they discovered that he had the congenital heart disease as well. He had 3 holes in his heart. He had an enlarged heart, and he had an enlarged liver, and he had other various and very difficult complications. He was rushed up to the hospital, and they gave him some medication, and from then on, for the next 17 months, we lived with death in our house. We were a proud people, folks. Though we didn't have much of this world's goods, though we didn't have an awful lot to claim by way of merit, nor did we have anything to brag about by way of success or ambition, we were a proud people nonetheless. I believe that God sent that young life. That's his photograph there. I believe God sent that little life to do a work in our hearts. A work that would never leave us the same again. For the next number of months, we had to go to Dublin to do a special test with Raymond. They pronounced that he had a serious and inoperative heart condition. and they would never be able to do anything for him to save his life. I don't know if you've ever received that kind of news as a young parent. I suspect perhaps there are one or two in this meeting, and you suffered something similar. You've had a miscarriage or a stillborn, and you're still suffering and still have memories. I was called up to the hospital 2 weeks ago in my own church. A little Portuguese family, they've all got saved in the church, and the little boy David was up in the intensive care. And I was called up, and they weren't giving him much hope. And so I rushed up to the hospital to pray with his mum and for the little David. And then I came back to church. This was Sunday morning, and I came back, and before I preached, I said I would like us all to stand and pray for David. I wasn't able to pray. I was brought back away back to to the day whenever Raymond lost his little life. And as I saw that little boy just a couple of weeks ago, I saw my own son. Do you know what the good news is? David recovered, and he's full, hale and hearty, and he's well today. But you never get over the loss of a child. It's not a natural process. They're supposed to bury us. We're not supposed to bury them. My heart was broken, as was Esther's. But anyway, Raymond lived. He had heart condition. He had heart failure 5 times. He had pneumonia 17 times. He was a very ill and sick little boy. He had a very shallow breath, and he had a very pale reflection. I remember many occasions Esther phoning me. There was an emergency. Raymond's heart was in failure. And we were never offered from that moment on any ambulance service, mind you. And any time that Raymond had to go from Monaghan to Drogheda, which was 54 miles, I had to put him in a little blue Hillman Avenger and take him up the road with his mother nursing him, trying to keep him alive. When we got to the hospital, they would put him into a little oxygen tent. And because there was oxygen going into that tent, he would revive. When Raymond was 1 year old, he was able to put his hand up inside the tent, and he would we knew what the next thing was, that we were to put our hands up on the outside of the tent. When we would do that, he would put his little head down, and he would, I suppose in his heart, he was comforting his parents, and we felt everything was all right. Even though the doctors only gave him 5 years, I never ever thought that we would ever lose our little son. I remember one occasion someone told us about a man called Sammy Workman. He was coming to Monaghan to conduct a mission. And so I said, we had tried everything. I said, we'll go and see Sammy. I was not interested in the gospel at this stage. I had never heard the gospel. I thought a mission was to little children in Africa. And so whenever we went up to Sammy did something strange and unusual. He brought us into a little room, and he said, Lord, you are sovereign, Lord. You can do anything you choose to do. Lord, you could heal this little boy. But then he prayed. And I was an unsaved man, and I can remember it so well. He said, but Lord, would you not do a work in these young parents' hearts? And with that, he prayed for us and him, and we went off home again. Just the day before Raymond died, I got another phone call from Esther. Raymond's heart's in failure one more time. And so I rushed home. I was a baker by trade, and trying to get the old bakery clothes removed and trying to get myself kind of dressed up to head up to this beaten track up to Drogheda Hospital. And Raymond was sitting in a little white rug, and he was coughing up blood, and his little skin was all blue prickles. And I was rushing up and down the sitting room, and Raymond's eye caught my eye. And God spoke to me through the look of a child, and here's what God said. What are you rushing around for? What's life all about? And folks, that sobered me. That was the first time that I seriously thought about life and death. God spoke to me through the look of a little child. It was the most powerful sermon that I've ever heard. And I sobered up in a moment. What was life all about? What was I rushing around for? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Have you ever wondered what your life is about? Do you think that you're just here to live and die like a dog and cease to exist? Do you think that you're placed on this earth just to satisfy and gratify your own flesh and lustful desires? Or is there a higher purpose? I want to tell you, just as there's a purpose for that pen, God has a purpose for every life. I had never thought of this before. This was new to me. That God had a purpose for my life. And what had I done with it up until this point? Well, I was now 24 and a half years of age, and I had wasted my life. What are you rushing around for? What is your life going to count for when you're gone? And so, we got Raymond into the little car. Esther was nursing him and praying outwardly, even though we were not Christians. I could hear her says, Lord, keep him living, keep him living. And I was racing this car, still never having been. To this day, I don't know why we were never offered an ambulance service. I was driving, and it was reckless, but we had only one desire, and that was to get Raymond to Drogheda, where we knew he would be safe, or at least thought so. We got Raymond into his little oxygen tent, and again his little hand up on the inside of the tent, our hand on the outside of the tent. He put his little head down on the pillow, and he was seeking to comfort us. And because we had another elder son at home, and because when you have sick children, all your finances go towards that sick child, I had to go home. We were 6 months behind in our mortgage for the house. The ESB, which is the equivalent to your NIE, were threatening to cut off the electric. And I needed to go home and work. And we had to look after a little boy, and we didn't have any services of any kind to help us in this time of trouble. Maybe that's exactly where you are. Went home about 12 o'clock, ran out of petrol, pushed the car into a man called Tony McCarville's. He gave me £5 worth of petrol and tick, and got the car started again, and went home, went to work, I paid the next day, and Esther kept in touch with the hospital. And then at 3:30, the hospital phoned the neighbour's house, because we still had no phone, couldn't afford it. And you need to come up, your little son's condition has deteriorated. Well, we were trying our best. As soon as I would get finished work and get home, we would be up that road as was our custom. And of course into the car, tearing up the road. We knew the road by this stage off by the off pat. We knew every crack and crevice and every corner and every difficult. We knew every part of this road. And we raced up the road, and there's supposed to be a compassionate nurse that meets you in the hospital whenever there's the fatality or the death of a little infant. But for whatever reason, she wasn't on duty when we arrived, and we went to the bed that we'd left him the night before, seemingly safe and sound and doing well. But when we got to his little bed, he had already passed into eternity. He'd taken a massive heart attack as the nurse was working with him, and he died instantly as the nurse was in her nurse's arms. We were angry, heartbroken, confused. There was a million emotions that stirred our hearts. Our little precious, though you might think handicapped child, the more dependent a child is on you, the more you love them. The more dependent a child is upon you, the more you love them. There's another element to that love that you cannot hardly discover until you come to a high dependent infant that's dependent upon everything and anything. Well, 3 or 4 days later, it was the time for Raymond's funeral. The house was packed because we have a large family, and it was packed from to the rafters, and there was never hardly time to think about who you were or what you were or where you were in your mind. But I do remember the day of the funeral. The Reverend David Hillen, the Presbyterian minister, who's now a very close and dear friend, who's now retired, living in Limavady, he took the funeral service. He used that little title from Isaiah 11, "A little child shall lead them." And he said, we cannot understand, or can we fathom out or work out how come God has allowed this in their family. Do you remember what I said now? God allowed it. He didn't send it. He allowed it. There's a difference between God sending heartache and allowing heartache. The Word of God says that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to His purpose. And remember at that funeral service, he sought to explain how it was that this little boy, and perhaps what God may be doing through this. Perhaps, he says, God is trying to work on this young couple to bring them to Himself. That was prophetic, wasn't it? Well, I can remember looking into the grave. Have you ever wondered what goes through the heart of a young parent as they look into the graves of their child where they're going to be placed? I said, Raymond, I know where you're going. I don't know where I'm going. That troubled me. I mean, I'd been baptized and catechized. I'd been dragged along to church and Sunday school occasionally, or as often as my mother could force me to go. I had seen religion at work, but it gave me no hope for the future. For 22 months, that little look of our son, what are you rushing around for? What's life all about? I know where you're going, but I don't know where I'm going. For 22 months, you'd have found me out walking the fields, 4 o'clock or 3:30 or maybe even earlier in the morning. Not all the time, but quite often. My heart was breaking. You'd see me, if you'd have been on the other side of the hedge. Now, I didn't let the family know, I didn't let anyone know, but if you'd have been on the other side of the hedge and you're looking at me and you saw me prancing up and down the field, shaking my fist at God, you'd say that poor man never got over the loss of his son and never will. Never will. But I was seeking for some kind of sense to life. I was wanting to see some kind of hope for the future and finding none. For 22 months I was lost. Lost in my grief. Lost in my anger. How dare God take our little son? How God dare let a little innocent child be taken without any hope of any kind of life? How dare God invade our home in this way? God was getting all the blame. All the blame. Maybe that's what you've done. You blame God for some of the things that have happened in your home and in your family, when all the time it's not God's fault. And if God has allowed something to happen in your heart and in your home, then He's allowing it for a reason. And not until you bow your knee and trust in Christ will you ever discover what that reason truly is. Well, after 22 months, I was in the sitting room of our own home in 24 Tully in Monaghan. I was listening to a record by Jim Reeves. I can't for the life of me understand where I picked it up, but I don't know who gave it to me. I could possibly have stolen it. I don't know. The LP was called We Thank Thee. On that LP there were 2 songs. I'd rather have Jesus and silver or gold. And the other was Have Thine Own Way, Lord, have Thine Own way. Esther was away at a meeting for foster parents, because we had now at this stage become foster parents. And so I was minding now our foster daughter, whose name is Nicola, now living in Drogheda, and also my eldest son, Darren. And I started listening to these 2 songs. Do you remember the old vinyl LPs? Do you remember them? Remember the old arm of the LP, and you played it over, then you lifted it back, and you played it over. You're nearly as old as me. And I started listening to these 2 songs, and I played them over and over and over and over again. And the next thing, God started to work in my heart. I felt at that stage that I was the only sinner that was ever born. In fact, as a teenager, I had a fear of dying and going to hell. But by this stage, as I listened to these 2 songs, I came to the place where I realized that hell was too good for me. I realized that I deserved to be lost. I had neglected and rejected God all my life, and I had been angry with Him for almost 2 years. And now I'm discovering that God had loved me all this time and he was angry at my sin. I got down on my knees just beside the sitting room, beside the settee. And I said, Lord, I don't know how to become a Christian. I've seen plenty of hypocrisy, but I really don't know how to become a Christian. But all I know is that I need you. I need you to fix this broken heart. I need you to change this angry, perverted life. And I want to tell you, look at me when I say this, because it is as significant and as instant as this. In a moment, the moment I opened up my heart, his grace flooded in. And I was changed in a moment. And I was so changed that I was never ever the same since. And nor has my life ever felt. I've never ever felt like going back into the world. I was spoiled to the world, and I was supernaturally altered by the divine power of God, and I have been singing his praises ever since. I went into work the next day. I still worked in this bakery, and I was singing, he lives, Christ Jesus lives today, he walks with me. I to this day do not know where I learned that song. I still don't remember. I don't know how I learned it. And they were looking at me at work as if Gillanders has got religious. And then they started taking bets to see how long it would last. I think they've lost all their bets, I'd say. God had changed. And then all of a sudden, light flooded my soul. And I said, why did I not do this long ago? What was I afraid of? Who was I afraid of? And so, God started working in my heart. I started getting desires for the things of God, for the scriptures. Started getting the desire. By the way, 3 days later, Esther herself came to Christ as well. She says, it's her testimony, I'm not going to give it for you, but by the way, I asked her to marry me on my first date. Did you hear that? Fellas, if you want to know how it's done, see me after the meeting. And God began to work in our home. I can remember he challenged me, God challenged me to take a little New Testament to work. So I got myself, remember the half tin of biscuits? Isn't it interesting? See those half tin of biscuits, so they're getting smaller every year, aren't they? Well, there used to be a half tin of biscuits was a full tin of biscuits then, now. And I got a few wee sandwiches, I got my drop of milk, I got my wee tea bag, and I got my wee mug, and I got my wee New Testament into that box. You see, whenever you're brought up the way I was brought up, you're greatly embarrassed about God. That's what we were. You wouldn't even carry your Bible to church because everybody would be talking about you. And so I got my New Testament into my box, and come lunchtime, it wasn't to preach to the boys at work, it was just to read God's word during my lunch break. Well, I was so painfully embarrassed. I used to get the tin off the box, and I used to get my sandwiches out, and I used to get my head into the wee box. And I used to say, Gillanders is hungry the day again. I was hungry, but I was hungry for God. If I hadn't have obeyed God there, I wouldn't be standing before you now. It is no secret what God can do. What he's done for others, he'll do for you. With arms wide open. What's the rest of it? He's calling you. It is no secret what God can do. My life has been eternally altered by the grace of God. I would ever give him praise because I knew at that moment, whenever I trusted him, that Christ had died on the cross in my stead and for me. That it was no merit that I had ever done, and nothing of value that I had ever achieved, but purely and simply because Christ had loved me. And he loved me so much that he gave his life for me. Now let me take you way back to that sitting room where I was listening to Jim Reeves, where I was confronted with this question that Pilate was uttering. Verse 22, and I'm going to be 7 minutes exactly. What shall I do with Jesus, which is called the Christ? What was going through my mind? What was going through my heart? I suspect the same things that was going through Pilate's heart. Pilate was faced with an awful decision. What shall I do with Jesus? You can hear the pain. You can hear the agony. You can almost feel it. What am I going to do with Jesus? I'm reminded of a story of a man who was walking past a river. He had twin sons walking with him, and that both of them walked too close to the edge of the bank, and both of them fell in. The father was just an ordinary swimmer, not a great swimmer. But his twin sons had now fallen into the fast-flowing river. And that father was faced. Which son am I going to save? To choose one was to lose the other. He'd have to live with that choice for the rest of his life. That's exactly how Pilate felt. What am I going to do? Have you ever wondered what it is that's behind that awful battle that's going through your heart? Is it because you haven't fully understood the significance, the importance of the decision that's placed before you? For Pilate, he could not have known the significance of the choice. For him, it was one of a universal and eternal choice. Now, for you, it may not be universal, but I want to tell you it is an eternal decision. What shall I do? Is that what's ringing through your heart? He was faced with a decision. Would you have liked to have been in Pilate's shoes that day? And yet every time you come to a gospel meeting and you're faced with the claims of Christ, you're in exactly the same position, because there's no middle ground. You either accept him or you reject him. There's no other choice. I remember being in a gospel campaign. This is meat and this is bread and water to me. This is milk and bread and butter to us. This is what I was brought up in, preaching the gospel. Tent campaigns. I loved them. I can remember one tent campaign, this young man who was smoked 100 cigarettes a day. And I can remember Esther made an illustration, or she made this challenge. If you want to trust Christ tonight, she says, as you walk down the aisle, you choose which hand you're going to shake me with. And if you're going to shake me by the right hand, which is the normal hand, I know you're rejecting him. But she says, if you want to shake me by your left hand, then I know that you want to trust him. And I can remember Andy coming down the length of that tent, and I can remember when he got from here to Willie John, he started looking at his hands. I could see the anxiety. Which hand am I going to shake? And we thought that he was going, you could see it literally happening in the tent. And as he came closer to Esther, we could see the battle. And as he almost stepped forward, we could see him reaching forward. And he reached with his left hand and was born again. And his life was utterly changed. We had a woman walked into church just recently. She's from a Muslim background, from Turkey. And here's how she got converted. She says, I met Jesus as I read the Bible. It's that simple. You're faced with a choice. Make no mistake. It's either yes or no. It's not a maybe, because maybe is to reject. Someday is to reject. Putting it off until tomorrow is to reject. In fact, it's the greatest sin of all. To put off until tomorrow what you should be doing today. Because if you knew that you should be doing it today, you know you're doing wrong by rejecting it. Faced with a decision. I'll tell you what else. He was faced with a religion. It was the religious men that presented Jesus before these people. It was religion that put Christ on the cross. And you've been saying, I'm a deacon, or I'm an elder, or I'm a church warden, or I have a position in the church, and my church doesn't preach you must need to be born again. If your church doesn't preach you need to be born again, they need to start. Except a man is born again, he'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. One of my choices, I was brought up Presbyterian, and I was fighting this battle because I was baptized as an infant, and I've been taught the catechism. I was taught to wipe my nose and say my prayers and polish my shoes and comb my hair and go to church and everything will be all right. Is that the battle that you're doing? Not only was he faced with a decision, not only was he faced with a religion, but he was also faced with a rebellion. Rather, a tumult was made. All hell was against Pilate making the right choice. All hell is against you making the right choice. You know that you've got an enemy. Those wandering thoughts that's going through your head now. Those issues that that the devil is putting before you. If I become a Christian, then the Lord will laugh at me. If I become a Christian, then my husband will get mad. If I become a Christian, it's going to cost me all that back paying tax. If I become a Christian, I'll not be able to keep it. If I become a Christian, I'll not be able to show it. My dear friend, every voice that you're hearing that's telling you to put it off is a voice from the devil. I remember one day we were prepared in the hall. I'm almost finished now. I remember we were in the hall, in a wee orange hall in Tobermore, and it was a big high ceiling in this orange hall, and we used to use got very fancy heating here, and make sure that you're well. There's a sauna in here tonight, isn't it? and come here and lose weight. You don't need to go to the health spa. But we were in the Tobermore in an orange hall, and I was going around, we had about 4 or 5 super chairs, and I was going to make sure that they're all pointing the right way, because if you're getting hit full in the face with a super chair heater, you know what'll happen. That's what happens, isn't it? Gas will put you to sleep. And so I was making sure that it wouldn't be hitting anybody full in the face, making sure that the tanks are good and heavy and right. And it was right beside this super chair heater, and way up in the ceiling there's this bulb, and it just shot down to the ground a bit. It hit the floor about a half an inch from my feet, and I said, "You old devil, you missed." All hell. Listen, who knows but you're a battle to get here tonight. We battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickednesses in high places. You've got an enemy, and his name is the devil, and he hates your soul, and he longs for your worship, and he's crying for you to follow him. And he'll give you all the pleasures of this world to make sure he gets you over the precipice into a lost eternity. He was faced with a decision. Let me finish this little thought. I think it's worthy. He was also, not only do we see Pilate's awful dilemma, we see his actual decision. You see, he gave in to the pushing and the persuasion of the people. That's what he did. They pushed him into this decision. The people that you work with, the people that you share your home with. Oh, they're doing this, and if I become a Christian, I couldn't do that. And their opinions this, and their opinions that, and there's nothing to this our religious life. You forget about it and go out and enjoy yourself. They can laugh you into hell, but they never laugh you out of it. There's plenty of entertainment on the way to hell, but there's none there. He gave in to the pressures of the people. Notice very quickly, verse 19, he ignored the pleading of his partner. She says, "Have thou nothing to do with this just man?" She had a dream. God had warned her. Maybe you've heard your pastor pray for you. Maybe you've heard your partner pray for you. Maybe someone has witnessed to you. Maybe someone has told you you need to be right with God. He ignored the pleading of his partner. He gave in to the pressure of the people. And you know what else he did? He even went against his own personal preference. I find no fault in this man. The number of people that I have heard say this to me: I know I need to be saved. In fact, I know I want to be saved, but I just can't do it. And what is it you're trying to do, missus? Because he does it all. And as that young man in 24 Tully and Monaghan doing that battle in my heart, I can remember the struggle. I can remember the fun that we used to poke at Uncle Cecil and other Christians when they used to gather at the street corner and do their open airs. We used to mock them because they said, "Oh, the drink should be through in the river," and we'd sing, "Shall we gather at the river where all the free drink is?" And I can remember saying, "Lord," I remember saying to myself, "I know the fun that I poked at Christians, and I know that fun will be poked at me." Can I ask you tonight, what are you going to do with Jesus, which is called the Christ? I know this is probably something you've heard many, many times, but I really, really, really mean this when I say this. I wish I had another 1,000 lifetimes to live for him. I would give it all to him again. And that's not a religious man that's talking. That's a sinner that has been saved by grace. And he can save your soul as well. At our little son's funeral, I don't know why we chose this hymn. I think we heard it at a mission that was held in a church, and we'd attended one meeting. And we had this song sang, "I hear thy welcome voice that calls me, Lord, to thee, for cleansing in thy precious blood that flowed on Calvary. I am coming, Lord, coming now to thee. Wash me, cleanse me in the blood that flowed on Calvary." Strange hymn for a funeral. We'd heard it at a mission. But now we know the full impact and full import of it as we read these words now. I wonder, as we sing it just now, we're going to sing number 39. I want you to be as quiet as you can. Don't click them out handbags, they make an awful noise. And I want you to think about the words of this hymn. I want you to think about your choice and decision. And I want you to think, am I going to come to Christ, or am I going to remain in the doldrums and in the wilderness for the rest of my life? You know, God's stirrings and strivings will not always continue with man. You could be almost into the kingdom and be lost. Judas was one of those. Seek the Lord while he may be found. You make that decision as we stand and sing this hymn. And you'll have opportunity to speak with me at the end as you leave the tent. And there's a little room at the back there where we can pray with you, pray for you. I can't save you, by the way. That may disappoint you. But I know someone who can. And his name is Jesus. Don't miss it tonight, folks. Don't miss it. Whatever you do. Thank you, sister.
I hear thy welcome voice that calls me, Lord, to thee, for cleansing in thy precious blood that flowed on Calvary. I am coming, Lord, coming now to thee. Wash me, cleanse me in the blood that flowed on Calvary. 'Tis Jesus calls me on to perfect faith and love.
rather have Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather be His than have riches untold. I'd rather have Jesus than houses or land. Yes, I'd rather be led by His nail-pierced hands than to be the king of a vast domain and be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. I'd rather have Jesus than worldly applause. I'd rather be faithful to His dear cause. I'd rather have Jesus than worldwide fame. Yes, I'd rather be true to His holy name than to be the king of a vast domain and be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. The potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after Thy will, while I am and still. Have Thine own way, Lord. Have Thine own way. Search me and try me, Master, today. Whiter than snow, Lord, wash me just now, as in Thy presence humbly I bow. Have only always living in me.